The right business model can propel you into a long-term, sustainable business. For this month's business plan, we will talk about what a business model is and how to create one so that you can create a successful business that can sustain the test of time. The whole is bigger than the sum of its parts. And I'll explain to you why I say that. And by the way, that quote is attributed to ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle nearly 2,500 years ago. Today, I want to focus on the tools and resources. And these are, think of them as parts available to you as businesses that have been developed since his time. Of course, since his time, there have been a lot of businesses that have been set up. A lot of them have succeeded, and a lot of them have failed. And there is some commonality. If you look at them, the successes and the failures, there are some commonalities that you can read off of and learn from. So that's what I'm going to try to do that today. The next picture that you have, and I'm going to show the picture, it looks like a coffee mug because that's intentional. And in that coffee mug, there are these terms that businesses have been using rather sloppily. And I would say business operation model, business strategy, business ecosystem, and you use the word ecosystem today, and business plan, and business model canvas, and a few others. And I say this, that these are tools that have been developed over decades of studying from academics and industry experience. So being that these are available to you, we can't afford to take them lackadaisical. We have to take them at heart and utilize them as they could benefit you and apply to you. So first and foremost, strategy versus business model. What Kmart has gone through versus what Walmart went through. And both of them have similar business model. What are those? They wanted to simplify what the business was. They wanted to remove the chandeliers, carpets, make it simple and cheap so that ultimately consumers could get cost benefit. That was really good. What differentiated Walmart is the fact that they really focused their strategy in the rural communities. Now, there were other problems with Kmart. We won't go into it. But if you can imagine, the difference between business model and strategy is just exactly that. If you look at it, they both created a business model. They went through and, but what Sam Walton did that was unique was that he went into rural community. He benefited from lower rent, lower lease, lower cost for the acreages and buildings, etc. And the rest is history. The next slide that I want to share with you is a model that took some pain to develop. And this was a model that we call it the operation model that Patrick and I worked very diligently. This was very painful to work, not because Patrick hadn't thought through, but think of it this way. With a model, think of it this way. We have a 10-year-old border collie. He wakes me up in the morning at around 5 o'clock. He expects me to take him for a walk, and I take him for a walk. When we return, he expects a treat. I give him a treat. And then I have to feed him. And then, of course, we have veterinarian connection. We have connection with Lindsay Grooming Service and Amazon. So if you think of the border collie as the business, what business is he in? In the business of love. So I give him those things, and in return, I get love. And his relationship to the veterinarian is we pay the veterinarian, and the veterinarian provides the service of caring for him. And similarly to Amazon. So a model such as this is simply to identify all the elements, all the organizations that you would be touching, and just identifying those ahead of time so that you know who you are going to be interfacing with and how the relationship is going to work. And they may be key partners, they may be key resources. In this case of OM.Farm, what is unique about that company, and Patrick will speak at the end of is that he focused all of his efforts into, get this, livestock leasing to countries, an organization called Asian countries. It's spelled ASEAN. It's an acronym for Association of Southeast Asian Countries, and there are 10 countries in that. He has identified all the elements, and notice that there are bidirectional arrows, arrow going one way to the organization and coming back from the organization. So the model is to identify all the elements that go between you, your business, and the organization that you need to touch with. The next one I want to talk briefly about is a business model canvas. Now this is another level of abstraction that's required that has been developed over time. And there are 9 modules in it. If you can think of the modules as internal and external. Much like the brain, we have a left side brain and a right side brain. Well, businesses have left side and right side too, a duality in the business. And what's in the left side? Left side, you could think of as anything that's internal processes, internal cost containment, internal efficiency. Those are internal things that you can control. And then the externals are the customer side. How are you going to generate the revenue? How are you going to control profitability? All of those things are considered external. So a business model canvas enables you to identify those elements of it that you can hopefully create a successful business from. A fellow named Bill Gross, he started 100 highly profitable and highly visible corporations in the country. 100 of which many of them succeeded, and many of them failed. And what he did was he went in and identified the companies that succeeded and that did not succeed. And this is his data. And it's quite surprising. Timing of when the company started is important. In fact, 42% of his successes came from timing. And the timing could be anything from you starting during recession time, the inflationary time. Certain businesses might do really well in that. I see Adam nodding his head. It could be as simple as, hey, we had Yahoo, and then came along Google with a newer and faster and an innovative search engine. And now look at where the two companies are. And so that's where the timing is. The second element that makes the company successful is the team and ability to execute. That's probably a no-brainer. You need to have a cohesive team, a team that works together well. An idea, how much of an outlier are you? Where are you in the spectrum of the idea you are? It turns out it's only 20. I'm saying 28%. I say only because compared to timing, it's further down. And further down even is business model. And then the last thing is funding. It's quite surprisingly. But I'll tell you something. In the last 8 years that I've been advising business, the first thing they want to do, they want to start a business. Oh, help me register my business. I tell them, take a deep breath. Registering the business in this country and starting the business in this country is the easiest step. Much more challenging are the rest of the parts. And so let's take a moment and get all the pieces together before you really scramble to start the business. That's one observation I made. The second observation I made, and this is generally true of technology startups, they always come to me with, where can I get funding from grants? I tell them, look, grants are highly competitive. Don't go there. If you don't have at least some money to get started with, at least get the feasibility, at least get through that phase, before you get all twisted up from funding. And I think some of that comes from the psychology of being in academia, where they live in the world of funding from government sources. In the last slide that I have, I call them additional resources. These are things that I reference in my presentation. And then fourth item is the Pullman Marketing YouTube channel. Go there, subscribe to it, and follow the videos. They're awesome. But Patrick, if you could say a few words about, specifically, you could say how you came up with the model and what the business is and how it's doing and what other additional tools and resources that did you utilize?
So my background is livestock farmer, so I raise cattle, pigs, and I found farming is a great in terms of interest. I have so much interest in farming. That's why I started farming. At the moment, we operate 2 countries. It's in the Philippines and Japan. And what we do is we contact them, what's your current capacity, and the ability to operate more. And then we inject money into these farms. It's a small investment, but it makes a difference for them. So we operate about 6 to 8 livestock at the moment. And at the end of the year, we expect to increase that to about 300 livestock. So in terms of business operation models, initially I don't know anything about it, but then Aziz introduced me to it and it totally makes sense. It's helpful in multiple ways. First, when I go out and talk with stakeholders and farmers and show them this chart, they understand right away in terms of how we work. And then, like for example, a couple of weeks ago with Seattle, when I was raising some money to the friends, I print out a 40-page business plan. A 1-page business plan, that doesn't interest me at all. But when I show them the chart, they're like, oh, that's interesting. In terms of another benefit that I really like about it is that you get to see breakdowns. You know, your relationship with your partners. I mean, what are the breakdowns and other activities in our operation. And that it really helped kind of bring clarity and understanding to our operations.
Ron, could you say a few things about, Ron, by the way, is probably younger than me, but same number of years in professional experience and a lot of entrepreneurship experience. And he was also a VC at one time and just published a book on starting business. But Ron, if you could share some of your experience.
When I was down in Silicon Valley, on the large expressway, very heavily traveled main artery in the valley, there's a restaurant started called Just Breakfast, and did fabulously well. But they wanted to open up now for lunch. Well, what do you do when you're just breakfast? You've already branded yourself as a breakfast restaurant. So they changed the sign to say breakfast and more, and then tried to open up for lunch. Eventually they folded, but overall I think they were a good success. But this is an example of maybe strategic planning is too short-sighted. You're looking at what it is today, but not what it could be 5-10 years from now. And I see this a lot with entrepreneurs that, investors don't invest in products, they invest in companies. So you have to present more of a holistic approach to an investor rather than just saying, don't have a great product, we're gonna make lots of money. Well, to me as a VC, it doesn't mean anything. What's your corporate value? If I invest, I have a certain price that I pay for those shares. When I get out in 3 to 5 years, I want to have 10x on that. How are you going to give me 10x? And that's a concept of value, not of cash flow. So every startup I've ever worked with, the minute they get cash, they put it back into the company again. It doesn't go out to the investors. That would be bleeding off the growth capital you need to grow. So 90% of the investors that invested in a young company never get their money back. It's just a fact, and I've seen it over and over again, because the company doesn't plan to make that happen. Okay, and in some cases, even if they plan it, they can't pull it off. So at this point in my career, I'm retired now, but I look back and I say, the biggest danger, I think, for entrepreneurs is not knowing what you don't know. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs succeed in not knowing certain things. That's okay. And I'm not saying you have to be well-educated, well-rounded to be an entrepreneur. But let me give you an example. I got my bachelor's degree down in San Luis Obispo at Cal Poly, and all the way through school, I was really infatuated with setting an environment and making people feel like they're in a different place. Main Street, Disneyland, always just you walk down and you felt like you're in a different place. How do you construct that kind of an environment? And what elements of that environment help the person walking through it to really adapt to it? So I said, that's what I want to do when I get out of school. I was a marketing major. So it came down to, here's my senior year, now we got to make a decision where we're going to get out of the real world and work. So I said, okay, well, gee, my dream's always been Disneyland. Why don't I apply at Disneyland? And then I thought, well, wait a minute. I don't want to live in LA. But all this time I had in my mind that, Disneyland is the place to go. No, you got to live in LA to do that. It sounds so stupid, but it's an elementary example of thinking ahead and thinking long term rather than just short term. Part of the operation planning work that I do encourages entrepreneurs to think out, where are you going down the road long term? If you got investors, how are you going to pay them back? In an investor presentation, you always want to show them that. You want to show how great your product is. This is going to produce a lot of cash. Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. How do I make money?
Iron Mike Tyson, heavyweight champion, had a saying that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Adam, did you want to say some things about how your business got started? And this is a time for confession. If you didn't use it, that's okay. But you are where you are. You have 8 people working for you, and that's a wonderful thing.
I agree with the other chart about timing, execution, and those other factors. Because for my business, I entered at a time when web design was almost commoditized. Because it's okay, well, why pay a web designer when you can just buy a Wix site or a Squarespace? And then with the moment you turn it into a commodity, you immediately devalue the entire service. But it devalues the timing, the execution, and everything else. So my model is not new. It's I build a thing and I sell it. Like that is truly what it is. And I probably should have done a lot more planning. Funding was probably one of the lowest of my concerns, which it probably should have been higher on my concerns if I'm honest. We rented our house to 2 college students. I was married at the time. We had a 4-bedroom, 2-bed house, or 2-bath house. We rented the bottom half of it, shared kitchen, shared everything. It was an interesting experience. I can't recommend it for everybody, but it worked out for us. Just because funding, I didn't think about. The strategic plan of, okay, well, how do I get my message out in my marketing? It wasn't until I realized that in Pullman, you have to have a brick and mortar to be a real business. And that was just a kind of a weird mentality thing in the area where for me to be credible and not just a guy in my basement who makes websites, which I was, I had to be out in the community a heck of a lot more. I had to be engaging on a one-to-one relationship with people. Even though we have clients all over the United States, if I really wanted to support Pullman, support local businesses, well, I needed to act like one. So in terms of, where are we going to be 3 to 5 years? It wasn't until I started thinking that way of what does 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years look like, then I could actually start making forward momentum, because then I could backtrack my goals, right? If I want to be in the community, well, I need to make X amount of funds to get a brick and mortar. I need X amount of funds to get my first employee. Oh, well, shoot, if I need to do that, I only have so much time. I need to charge X amount to be able to make this happen. And so it really started that process of thinking, I probably do need to do this operations model a little bit tighter. We just have so many SaaS or other software as a service that we pay for that it's hard to chart. Then also you don't know where your money is going with how many subscription services you have. Ron's comments and your comments have actually really got me moving. When we talk about strategic planning, what would you say is the difference between strategic planning and then innovation testing or piloting different programs within your organization, right? Because you might say, hey, in 3 years we want to be doing X. But as I look at the market, it might be worth it to experiment with this or experiment with that. How do you differentiate the two in the long run?
there's no perfect plan. And 9 times out of 10, especially the level you're talking about, you don't really know where you're going. You can say, well, I think this is where I'm going. I think it's good to do that. This is the plan I'm working toward. But you got to be constantly aware that, maybe this plan over here that really materializes. And I wish I had a simple solution for you, but I think that's the nature of business. And I've seen it time and time again, a company that says, we do this. And they start going that way and find out either it's not viable, no funding sources are interested in that or whatever, but they are interested over here. I remember one company, they were 4 or 5 software developers, very talented. They're developing technology in telecommunications. Fiber was just coming out at the time, and they're so really advanced group doing real well. They had a vision for the future. What they ended up doing was selling themselves as a team to a company that needed a whole research organization. And their whole business model went up in smoke. But that's what they wanted to do, and that was the future that was the best for them, so we did it. So that kind of stuff happens all the time, and you got to stop and evaluate to say, consider everybody involved in this.
I don't know when Google started to provide their employees with flexible time for them to work on projects that they wanted to work on. And those things Gmail, for example, is an outgrowth of that, and many other projects. I don't know if you can afford that kind of flexibility, but that was kind of an experimental thing. And they actually reward the people that fail. So they celebrate failures just as well as they celebrate successes.
So then when we look at what factors matter most for company success, and we say funding, does that include sales, right? Or does sales sit in the execution? And so then therefore does sales become a more accelerated piece of the puzzle?
I would say that the funding, in this specific case, is talking about initial and at least the startup phase through perhaps the growth phase. Hopefully by the time you get to the growth phase into maturity phase, you're already kind of making money anyway and should be able to.
So does sales trump grants?
The one thing about grant that's sort of sweet is that it's non-dilutive. It doesn't hurt your bottom line. But there is a cost to pursue a grant. There's a cost to pursue a grant. And I always urge people, hey, if you don't have the experience in writing grant proposals, either hire someone or allow enough time, and I say 6 months, to write, review, know exactly what you're doing before you go down that path. And many of them fail. And I'm thinking, you don't play to fail, do you?
If all you could have is grant funding, there's a train wreck ahead. There's a brick wall, because when it's done, it's done. Now you got to reapply and do something all over again. Whereas generating revenue is something that replicates on and on. You fine tune the process that you go and build it. So, company that Aziz referred me to, the president asked me that specifically. He says, we got grant opportunities here. What do you think? I said, you got to keep the doors open. I get it. If you can do that economically with grants, that's fine. But don't confuse that with your strategy of earning revenue. That's predominantly what you have to do here. If you start focusing on grants and sit back and relax because you got a grant, you're going to hit that brick wall sooner or later.
I thought we have great ideas. So I immediately looked for grant funding from the government, and we looked to USA. And so we spent like a couple months writing a grant application, we submitted it, and then, at the end, after 8 months, we got a reply back saying not enough information. So in hindsight, I was like, okay, so rather than spending 2 months to apply for this grant from the USA, focus that 2 months on improving our business models and so on, and actually gaining sales and revenue, because that's what's going to maintain us. So with the help of AZ business model, it really helped me identify that and focus on getting our revenues rather than going out and get fundings and grants.